Headstarts is a book about child raising, and it covers everything from antenatal right up to late adolescence, and it covers all aspects of well-being, from physical to sort of psychological, mental and emotional, to social well-being, friendships, loneliness, and obviously academic achievement at school, but also sports and hobbies, everything from computer games to everything else that kids get involved in. But yeah, obviously not just physical well-being, but emotional well-being and all that comes with that. So I guess, yeah, a holistic approach to child raising, and it's based on 100 different studies, so different papers that have been written internationally. So what I like about that is it's not just my opinion, it's certainly not Vanessa's opinion. It's based on 100 different studies written by over 100 different authors around the world. What motivated me to write the book was that obviously I have a keen interest in children and child raising. I think I always had an interest, but particularly so obviously when I had my own kids. And I guess what I noticed was that there were obviously a lot of books around about child raising, and some of them tended to have a relatively kind of didactic approach that, you know, this is the way to do it and this is not. And I guess the irony was that there would be another book pretty much saying the opposite. And I guess what I was interested in was maybe providing a book that gave a counterpoint to some of these arguments, but was not necessarily telling parents do this or do that, but maybe providing just grist for the mill, more information, a rationale for this way of doing this, a rationale for that way of doing it, and thereby giving parents kind of a framework for thinking about it and thereby making their own decisions. Well, I guess in the first instance, having children and having been pregnant, it gives you a greater investment and a greater interest. Yeah, so I guess I was more invested in wanting to know about these issues, and yeah, obviously it allows you to relate more to all the problems and the issues that people have. But the other beauty of it, I suppose, is that being a mum, you tend to cluster with other mums, you go to mothers groups, you know, you go to preschools, and so you hear about not just the issues that you experience, not just the issues that that arise for you personally with your kids, but obviously you hear about, you know, a lot more other kids, and yeah, you get more of a sense of which issues are kind of significant issues for many, many families and many babies, toddlers, children, their older siblings, and for families at large. I don't think I've necessarily had any kind of UFO style crazy experiences, but really, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about crazy experiences, it all comes down to poo, really. Just different experiences of kind of neck to knee style poo situations where, I don't know, you've arrived somewhere, let's say, things that I recall pretty well is when I've been due to go live to air on television, and of course I've brought several sets of clothes for my baby, but only one set of clothes for me, and you've arrived and you get him out of the capsule and he's neck to knee in poo, and you've got to do a very quick change in a dark car park in the sort of tiny gap between your car and the other car, and you're thinking, if I get poo on me, it's not going to be very good because I'm going live to air on national television in 10 minutes. And yet in all the time, I think with both boys, even though I've always carried around great big backpacks with several sets of clothing changes for them, somehow it's never occurred to me to actually put in a spare set of clothes for myself. The way the kids will, like both of mine are boys, discover my high heels, and when their feet are really small, it's actually quite funny that they only just learn to walk, but they can actually walk very efficiently in very high heels because their feet are so small that their whole foot is in kind of the toe part, so they're actually not in the heel part at all. So you see these little boys in nappies walking around in these really high heels, and Anton would often sling a tie around his neck as well and have a handbag and these high heels and sometimes like a Chinese brocade hat and then get around the house like this. So I've got a few videos of those and I think they're quite funny. I guess I made some choices fairly early on. When I say I made choices, at the time I didn't feel as if I had a choice. I was so attached to my first baby, really from very early on in the pregnancy, like basically a couple of months in, I already felt a great deal of attachment. And even though I heard that, oh, most people go back to work after 6 months, 12 months, and I imagined that would be what I'd do, as the pregnancy went on, I started to think, oh, actually, I don't know if I will do that. And certainly once he was born, I knew I definitely wasn't going back to work in clinical practice, or really I wasn't planning to basically leave him at all. So I concentrated on doing just the writing and the media stuff, whereby I could write when he was asleep, and with the media and filming things, I'd either take him with me to the studio or people would come and film at my place. And I felt at the time certainly that I was very fortunate to be able to do that. And as I said, it obviously was in fact a choice, but at the time I really didn't feel as if I had a choice. I really felt I couldn't be separated from him, or I certainly didn't want to be for any length of time. What was the most challenging was the fact that just when you sort of felt like, yes, I've got a routine and this works, then obviously your child would move into a different phase where they were, a hell of a lot more mobile, or they basically slept a whole lot less, or they basically had different demands and different needs. And then of course they developed their own schedule of activities, whether they've got to be at kindy music and swimming and gymboree and play dates, and so they developed their own life. In a way they have more of a schedule than you do, because you plan your schedule around them, whereas their activities are relatively more set. And then I guess when they start going to preschool and now school, again, the more they become entrenched and have in their own lives and have their own schedule, in some ways it's good because you've got more time to get your things done. But in another way, it's less flexible, because whereas when they were babies, they're just sort of part of the package and they come with you. But then obviously when they're doing school and things like that, and they've got activities like karate or swimming, like that's actually kind of a commitment that you make, that you have to make sure that you fit around their schedule. Well, I guess it's probably a cliche, but obviously, loving them, that's probably the primary thing, and having a fairly positive and confident attitude towards your parenting. So realising that, you might get it right, you might get it wrong, but if you get it wrong, you've still got plenty of opportunities to get it right. So I suppose having a fairly relaxed and flexible approach to your parenting. And I think one of the most important things is having some trust both in your child and in yourself. I think that it's probably a mistake to try and be too controlling over what your child does in terms of their activities or the way they spend their time. I think maybe it's a good idea to some extent to trust that if they're doing something a lot, it's probably because they find it very interesting and engaging, and sometimes to maybe just take a step back and look at what they're doing, what they're naturally finding themselves doing, and just seeing whether or not that seems to be like a worthwhile thing for them to do. Maybe you don't have to intrude too much and direct them too much. Maybe like let them do their own thing for a little while at least. I think it's a mistake is to be too close-minded about what is the right and the wrong way to parent, and to be perhaps too judgmental, and to have too many preconceived ideas about how kids should be spending their time or how they should behave and that kind of thing, and perhaps to be too controlling of children generally. It's more important to focus on what your end point is, which is to have, I guess, a happy, fulfilled child that is able to establish an identity and go off and live a great life, and think more about how there might be different ways of achieving that, rather than being too focused on any one particular child raising regimen. Well, I think it'll appeal to parents generally, both parents of newborns and babies, as well as teenagers and adolescents. But I think obviously parents to be, because I think the thing is that it's before you've had kids that you've got more time to read books, and then, you know, maybe you dip back into it later. I think it'll be of interest to grandparents and aunties and uncles, people from maybe a different generation, so that they can, you know, maybe see how things have either changed or moved on, or perhaps not changed, or perhaps gone back to a former way of thinking. Because, like, I guess with all things, including parenting, there are fads and trends. There are kind of major ways of thinking. Like, there's the kind of the Spock era. There's, you know, back to, you know, children should be seen and not heard, and then, you know, a very sort of child-centric, the child is God. And then there's the kind of, I don't know, the current approach I would characterise as being kind of the hedonistic approach of, you know, how much fun can we have? Do you know what I mean? I think if you go maybe one or two generations back, you know, kids just kind of went along and did whatever their parents were doing, and the focus was really, you know, on parents getting done the things that they need to get done, and, you know, children just kind of did what the parents were doing. They were just kind of along for the ride, or, you know, occupy yourself while daddy fixes this or mum does that. Whereas now I think there's definitely a culture of you know, doing activities that are specifically focused around the child, and around the child often just having a lot of fun. It's not even necessarily it has to be educational. I think there's kind of a hedonistic and almost second childhood aspect to it as well, where the parents are having fun with their kids, and I think it's a very positive thing. But of course, I think, you know, there needs to be a balance there as well. I think it's going to appeal to a lot of people who have interest in kids, which is really pretty much everybody, and I'm really looking forward to working with booksellers to make it a success.